हाँ जी, हो गए मैम, हो गए।
Thank you, sir.
जी।
So today we will start the next course, the module name that is Contemporary Indian Literatures in English Translation, right? So before starting, I would like to shed light on few of the aspects of Indian English literature, right? Indian English writing, how the people start writing in English in India, which was actually a foreign language, and officially it became a language of communication, and how the language enjoyed the status of the lingua franca of the world, right? So it was actually one of the popular languages of the nation, of the world, and even in the nations as well, right? So before even starting it, we'll have a discussion over Anglo-Indian writers, and then Indo-Anglican writers, and then we'll further talk about the Middle English literature, Ancient literature, Indian literature, and how then became, gradually with the printing press, we'll get to know about the Middle Indian literature and the regional literature as well, and then we will, gradually focus about the Indian English writing, right? The Indian English writing. So what we are contemporary, reading the very, the contemporary novels or the contemporary writings, for example, be it as a prosaic writers, dramatists, poets, or even the novelists. So, but before starting, I would like to ask you, Sushmita. So, have you read any Indian writer? You must have read Indian writers in your syllabus. Have you read
Yes,
any? Oh, okay.
yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so can you name any a few of them? So any work that you have read, or anything that you have read in the syllabus? For example, we have Tughlaq by Girish Karnad, then we have Tamas, then we have novels, right? Do you have you read anything from this course?
Ma'am, from this course,
Yes.
ma'am, I have started reading the original text of Tamas,
Okay, good.
and I have read short stories, Salt, Birthday, Birds, Tiny's Granny, and right now I'm today I started the Compromise.
Okay, okay. Even I recommend you should read even Tughlaq as well, right? By Girish Karnad. It is a very popular drama by Girish Karnad, and Girish other plays of Girish Karnad are equally well, right? So you should read Girish Karnad's Tughlaq, right? So before starting the text, because today we will discuss Samaskara, right? Samaskara by U.R. Nantamurthy, because we have already talked about Dalits and tribals, right? Their subjugation, their oppression, right? How they were discriminated in the upper caste society, upper caste and upper class society. So we will equally talk about, because you are Nandamurti himself as a South Indian Brahmin, so we'll get to know a Brahmin point of view, that how they look at their society, the Brahminical norms and cultures and the practices they are involved in. But before starting with the novel, let's start with the basically the Indian literature, right? The Indian literature, the ancient literature. Then we'll talk about the middle Indian literature, and then with the gradual, the upcoming of the printing press, and moreover, because of the colonial rule, because of the colonial masters, because we have burned the, we bore the colonization, we had the brunt of the colonization. This was the reason that English, gradually became the language of the common man. Even today, you can see that, you must have seen that in the lot of platforms, apart from the literature, and even in the lot of platforms in the society, even our cultural practices, we celebrate Christmas equally, right? With a great fervor. And same goes with the other platforms like the social media, that people are, even the Indians, the common Indians, they are interacting with each other in the simple English. And even you must have seen a lot of, people, so social influencers, and anybody who has, those who are coming to India, for the blogging, and or in order to have for the purpose of tourism. Even are, the very layman, the basic, rediwala, and the basic shopkeepers, right? Those who are having, simple shops, even they are communicating with these foreigners. They are communicating with these native English speakers in English, right? So that is because of the Indian writing in English, right? That how English flourished in India, and how it gradually, took the status of the language of communication or communicative language, right? So today, in our contemporary Indian literatures and English translation, right? So we will first we'll start with the ancient India, right? That how the language is spoken in the ancient India. And and the whole center, we will talk about the Sanskrit Vedic literature. But so India, we know it very well that how it is actually a land of differences, right? We have different languages, we have different cultures, we have different states, but we have differences, right? This was the reason that I'll glorified, we glorified Indian democracy as unity in diversity, because we have so many diversities, but yet it was because of the unity, right? The unity of all the religions, cultural practices. We have different festivals, different languages, different practices, right? In different corners of the nation, right? So there is a unity that precedes the nation formation, right? So it was all about the unity, because despite the unity, we formed the nation, right? We have already had a discourse in the last lectures when we were talking about the marginal studies, that how there were, how Dalits demanded a different country, how how Sikhs demanded a different country, and but ultimately they were gradually, they agreed, to live in a democratic country, and how rights, the reservations are given to them, for the Dalits. And the same equally goes with the minority rights, that how the minorities, be it Buddhist, be it Jain, be it Sikhs, or even the Muslims, right? So there are minority rights, for minority rights were reserved from them, so in order to build a independent democratic country. And it symbolizes our unity, right? So being the same was mentioned in Jawaharlal Nehru's Discovery of India, right? Have you heard of this book by Jawaharlal Nehru, Discovery of India?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
So there he mentioned that he was talking about, he was talking about the whole concept of India, the whole concept of Bharat, right? That how, discovery of India, that how India was formed, right, by fighting with the colonial masters, that how we got the independence, right, and how we are able to, develop a new Bharat, how we are able to develop the new India, right? From the Indus Valley civilization, how we actually, grow up to become the world's biggest democracy like the India. So here we, when we talking about India, so we will be talking about the two Indias, right? So it is, one is the urban India, and second is the rural Bharat, right? So in urban India, you must have seen the reflection in the metro cities, with the all the running around of the, the colonial practices were very much there, right? The setting up of the modernization, mechanization. Because of these, these terms, we have the urban India, right? But on the other hand, there is this rural Bharat, right, which is actually, where we have, the conflicts of Aryan and indigenous, and there is just the conflagration of a culture, right? So there we have the rural India, rural Bharat, and the urban India, right? So same goes with it, that in urban India, if you visualize urban India, you can see that English is a very common language, and English is a very popular language there, right? So they are the elite people, elite educated people, right? So their way of, communication is quite so smooth when it comes to language. But on the other hand, rural Bharat, when we talk about it, so they prefer more to talk in their regional languages, right? So this was the reason we have Gujarati, Marathi, Bengali, Tamil, Malayalam, right, and so on, so on. So we have a lot of languages like that. But on the other hand, when we talk about the India, right, we ancient India, or when we, the India after the independence, so English was actually the elite, language of elites, right? So basically the people who are actually, who are actually, born and brought up in a colonial setup, or in the elite culture, right? The Where the education was actually limited to the convent schools only, right? So it was one of the elite languages of India. And when we talk about the rural Bharat, right, so it was completely different from what we have the elite India. And on the other hand, when we talk about the rural Bharat, that was very much centered in the regional languages. And when we talk about our, elite language, the most prestigious language, that was Sanskrit, right? So this was the reason, more of the literature. So we have two types of literature: regional literatures. For example, we have already talked about, Bama by Sangati, that was, and same goes with Balbir Madhapurya Chhangya Rukh, that was actually in the Punjabi. So every state has their own regional literatures, and on the name of a kind of a similar literature, a common heritage, that was our Sanskrit literature. And basically, when we are talking about the Sanskrit, so it was the Vedic literature, Sanskrit Vedic literature, that was Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? So the two epics, right? So that was written in the India in the Sanskrit, that was Ramayana by uh, uh, by Valmiki, and Mahabharata by the Ved Vyas, right? And on the other hand, we have a lot of, Upanishads as well, right? So we have the culture of Puran and Upanishads in the ancient India, right? But with the gradually advent of the bhakti movement, right, when the bhakti movement came in a being in the South India, so gradually, because of the bhakti movements, there come the there came Kabir, then came Guru Nanak, then came, right, Mira, and from this there sprung up the devotional poetry, the devotional fiction as well, when we will be talking about the regional writings, right, the writings who are actually limited to the regions or to the states as well, right. So, when we were talking about the ancient India, apart from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the epics written in the Sanskrit, there were a lot of drama flourished. A lot of drama is something, right, that flourished in the India, right. Same goes with the British literature. When you read about the British literature, right? So the first thing that flourished there, apart from the poetry, that was the drama, right? The mystery, miracle, and morality plays because a drama has the direct identification with the man, right? So same goes with, we have the popular culture of Ram Leela, right? And this was the reason that Kalidas and Bhasa, right? So these are the playwrights who actually who sprung up from ancient India, right? Because they were writing the dramas, right? So the culture of the culture of Leela, right? So the Leelas were very famous, be it as a Lord Rama or be it as a Lord Krishna. So when we were talking about the middle Indian literature, so there we have the popular names of Kalidasa and we have the popular names of Bhasa, and then came our Bhakti movements, as I have already told you, the saints, right. So these were actually the saint poets, right. So saint poets, so be it in the Tamil Nadu, be it in the Punjab, be it in the, you could say, Gujarat. So there were different saint poets, right. So they chant the name of the Lord, right. So they chant the name of the Lord. So when we talk about these saint poets, so basically they chant, they sing, and they dance, and they celebrate the Lord, right. So earlier, the worship, you could say, we have already discussed in the Varna system, that how the worship was just limited to the upper sect, that was Brahmins, right. So they were allowed to perform the priestly duties. So here we have a different contrast. The bhakti movements sprung up all over the India. It flourished because it actually talks about the personal worship, right. So here the personal, as we have already talked about, how personal becomes political, in the writings of CK Janu, right. So here as well, that this personal worship becomes the personal, becomes the public, right. And this personal worship even becomes a political or socio-political edge as well, right. So these saint poets, right. So they were actually, they were talking, be it it has Kabir, it has Tulsidas, it has Mira, Chaitanya, Guru Nanak, right. So these different kind of saint poets, they sprung up for the personal worship. The reason is that in the middle, in India, you know it very well, that after the Hinduism, when we talk about the Hinduism, there were the the movements of Jainism and Buddhism, right. They flourished in the India, right, because they were actually challenging the rigid norms, the hypocrisy, and few of the practices, right. So this was the reason Buddhism and Jainism, right, it is sprung in the India, right, because it promises social justice. It was talking about equality. Same goes with Sikhism as well, because it is the youngest religion, right, one of the youngest religions started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji, right, around 1600, right. So same goes with Jainism and Buddhism as well, right. So Jainism and Buddhism are a kind of a sects that sprung from the Hinduism, right. And they have their own culture, they have their own principles, yet they denied the idolatry, or on the other hand, they denied the caste hierarchy. They denied the few of the, you could say, the overtly restricted practices. But gradually, it very well, every religion, right, with the with the rages of the time, right, it got few elements from here and there. So the reason of the springing up of the bhakti poetry is also because the Jainism and Buddhism, they were too strict for the people, right. So they were actually they born at the to challenge the restrictions of the Brahmanism, to challenge the restrictions of the Hinduism. But still, if when you read, and when you think about Buddhism and Jainism, so they were actually talking, they were all too talking about the life negating religious principles, where they portray that how man is cursed to be here, and only by being a monk you are able to you are able to celebrate the life. You must be, aware of the popular ceremony of Diksha in the Jainis, and same goes with, you must have heard of the Buddhist monk. I hope you are getting what I'm saying, Shushmita,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
right? So because of these, because of these rigorous practices, right, because it demands a lot of, determination, and it demands sacrifice. So these size, such kind of terms, uh, though it was approachable at the time of when it was started, right, because they were, because it actually provides a common layman, right, layman to become a monk, common layman to, to sacrifice everything. But with the advent of the, modernity, so such principles sound too rigid, too rigorous for a layman. So this was the reason that, in order to, in these life negating principles, they were, they were not shunned. But on the other hand, these, then came the bhakti movement, right? So they were actually talking about that you don't need to be a monk. If, for example, same goes with, Guru Nanak, when he was talking about that you can actually, you can actually enjoy the name of the Lord being in the grihast as well while living at your home. He said, was saying that, right, that while living, while performing your homely duties, you can still achieve the name of the God, right? So same goes with the Meera as well. Same goes with, Tulsidas, when he was, talking about Ramcharitmanas, that how, Ram was, Ram was the epitome of a ideal man, right? That how ideal man would be, right? So the same goes with the bhakti movement. So such such saint poets, they were talking about the personal worship, their idea of the God. So their idea of the God, because they were the simple people, right? So they were not the monks, they were not the saints, they were not the, they were not the people who belonged to the any hierarchy, and who were just limited, to perform such kind of duties. You must have heard of that, how, how, Meera was actually, became the voice of the voiceless. She was, she was actually, talking about that how Lord Krishna, Lord Krishna shows the salvation to the every guy in every sect of the people, right? So she became even the voice of the Dalit woman as well. She became the voice of Dalit as well, right? And same goes with the Sant Kabir, and we were talking about, Guru Nanak, that how through the different udasis, right? So he himself, went here and there to chant, promote the name of the God, right? And in order to, wipe out the discriminations that were there in the, in the other religions, be it Hinduism, or be it, the rigorous, practices of Buddhism or Jainism, right? So this was the reason, this personal worship, right? The kind of, idea, the way they perceive God, this personal worship became the ideal, right? So it ultimately becomes the ideal worship. And this was the reason that, sadly, these people, they try to, make people understand that how God is something very personal, right? And you don't need a particular religion to to have the idea of the God, right? And God is not something that is vested in a particular religion, right? So same goes with, the concept of Mirabai, and same goes with the concept of Chaitanya, Kabir, and Guru Nanak, right? So they though they promoted the idea, but it is the sad reality that people, they construct religion, of these, of these poets as well, right? So they were the saint poets. So they we were not talking about the religions, right, that started afterwards, right? For example, people started, a religion on the name of somebody, right? So there are different followers of Kabir, there are different followers of Guru Nanak, there are different followers of, Meera, right? So they started a different sects of, religious, you could say, associations, organizations, or they have invented a whole different religion. But the thing is, on the other hand, when we were talking about the literature, right, so they chant, they chant, they sing, and even they dance, on the rhythms of the, on the tunes of the, on the Lord, right? So the basic, the basic literature that sprung out of their writing, that was the devotional poetry, right? So that was basically the poetry, and that was the devotional poetry. So when we were talking about the Indian literature, so first of all, the basic things, apart from the, Ramayana and Mahabharata, because it has both the elements of drama and the poetry, because they were the worst dramas, right? So worst dramas. And on the other hand, then we have Bhasa and Kalidas. They were solely talking about the drama. And then came the poetry in the Indian scenario, that was from the devotional poetry of the Bhakti movement, right? I hope this much is clear.
Yes, ma'am.
right? And when we were talking about this devotional poetry, so this devotional poetry was celebrated all over in the different forms, right? For example, people were having, then we have, even I forgot to mention the Baba Farid, right, as well, right? So when we were talking about the saint poets, right, so Baba Farid is also one of them, right? So there comes the the different way of devotional poetry, right? So there were kawalis at the dargah, and then there were gurbani at gurdwara, and then kirtans, right, in the Hindu temple, right? That was the kirtan, there were different kind of kirtans that were accessible, and in the different sects, right? So it was not just limited, the Hindu worship was not just limited to the Brahmanism or the upper caste, right? So now the people from the other caste as well, they started performing different kind of kirtan, their own idea of Lord Krishna, their own idea of how a god would be, or how a god will be, right, in their imagination. So the devotional poetry was all about, it was all about imagination and the devotion, right? So, and it was, it became a rich part of the Indian literature. And then we were talking about the modern literature with the advent of the printing press by the Britishers, right? It was Britishers, right, that brought printing press to India, especially in the South India from the Tamil Nadu, right? And earlier, you know it very well that Arabic and Persian, right? So they enjoyed the equal status of prestigious languages with the Sanskrit, right? But on the other hand, you must be aware of Macaulay's minute,
Yes,
Shushmita,
ma'am. Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So you must be aware of the facts that how Macaulay cut down all the funds from the these ancient languages, be it Sanskrit, be it Arabic, be it Persian, and he invested all the funds in the on the English, and he
English.
invested all the funds on the schools, convent schools, the missionaries that they were running for for the promotion of Christianity and the English, right? So same goes here with the advent of the printing press, and especially with the modernization because of the colonial masters. So the Arabic, the Persians, right? So these were the dominant languages. Same goes with the Sanskrit. They were wiped out from the the scenario of the Indian literature and the uh, and from the India. And on the other hand, so in the 19th century, so we do we just have not much on the name of the, you could say, the ancient or middle literature. So there will be definitely the springing up of the regional literature, right? So so there is no way to learn, or there is no way to to rise above and learn the intricacy of such prestigious languages, right? So in the 19th century, so we were just left with the regional languages, and plus we were just left with the one languages, that is the English. And you know it very well that English was not a common language, not a layman's language, and only it will be accessible and available in the convent schools and and it was offered by the missionaries, right? And on the other hand, it was spoken by the colonial masters only, right? So there was actually there was a kind of a dialect that was very much popular that time, that was a butler English, right? So butler English is a kind of English that you must be aware that how colonial masters, right, they all the Britishers, the British officials, right, of the East India Company, they have their setup, and they have their own butlers, they have their cooks there, right? And sometimes these these cooks, they are the people, those who interact with the layman, right? So the Britishers don't understand the Hindi, or they don't understand the regional languages, they don't understand Malayalam, Kannada, or Tamil, right? So it was by the butlers, right, the cooks, right? Whenever somebody approaches the official, right, so it was their butler, it was their cook, right? So they used to communicate, they used to interact with that person. So with the very limited access of in order to curtail the limited in order to curtail the access, in order to promote that we are unavailable, we have a limited access with the civilians of the India, right? So the basic phrase that they were actually talking in a very yes, no, and in a kind of a distorted version of the English. So that was actually popularly known as the butler English as well, right? So the communicative, right, the kind of the kind of communication or interaction that held between the butler and the people that who were approached to meet the Britishers, right? So you could see that the kind of English was not a layman's language, right? With the advent of the modernization, and then but on the other hand, so people were actually comfortable in their regional languages, right? So be it Gujarati, Odia, Marathi, Bengali, Punjabi, right? And but then came after the 1857, you know it very well, that how in the first India's freedom struggle started in 1857 with the Mangal Pandey. And when the people, the Indians, they start fighting for the India's freedom, they realize that they are how they are dehumanized and how they are brutally oppressed by the Britishers, right? So there came the nationalistic prose, right? So the prose was introduced with the very modern era, right? So there came the prose. So prose were introduced with the nationalism, right? With the bubbles of the nationalism, right? So there were, so the prose was actually introduced to to motivate people, to aware the layman, right? So there were slogans, there were there were different. So the nationalistic prose was the product of the, or you could say the outcome of the 1857, the Bridroho of 1857. And gradually we got freedom. And the whole, if you read about the literature, right? So the 1857 literature, after the literature written in the India after 1857, so that was nationalistic in every concern, right? Nationalistic patriotic writings, right? So be it is Rabindranath Tagore or anybody else who is writing, right? Even the very famous Rio de Janeiro, right? So Henry de Rosio was talking about half of India, so where he was actually talking about that how India is a caged bird, right? And how India is in the clutches of the uh, Britishers, and how we need to free ourselves, right? So De Rosio was actually talking about the half of the India, that how India was a jewel, how India was a golden bird, and now he's in the now he's in the clutches of the Britishers. So there's such as the patriotic writing, the nationalistic writing, right? So that was actually famous, that was very famous that time. And because of the nationalistic prose, because of the nationalistic writing, right, people were more and more, they became aware of the oppression of the Britishers, right? So the whole idea of the writing was the nationalistic. And when you look at about the nationalistic writing, so they were actually they were in their they were in their regional languages, right? So that time Hindi was not at all, Hindi, though Hindi was a language of a for the for the layman's language, the language of communication, but it doesn't enjoy any kind of official status that time, because in order to put sentiments into the people, you really need to speak their language, you really need to communicate in their language, right? So the prose, or you could say the writings of the that after the 1857, so these writings were more or less promoting the regional languages, right? So be it Rabindranath Tagore, he was writing in Bengali, right? So or either it is going to be Lala Lajpat Rai, right? So all over the missionary, the all over the visionaries, right? Those who were writing, those who were actually making people aware. So they keep harping on the points of the growth of the regional languages, right? So it is after the India's independence, right, in the 1947, right? And but before 1947, right, we have already discussed that how Macaulay's minute, right, said that Macaulay was actually in favor of creating, he himself said that in the document, that he really want to build a race, right? So that would be Indian in color but English in taste, right? So he himself wrote that how he wants to build a race, right, by promoting English in India, right? And they know it very well, by promoting Christianity and English in India, they will promote their culture, they will promote their practices, right? So English was gradually became the, you could say, it entered into the social fabric, or you could say it entered into the fabric of the India, right? And by the we still have the culture of the convent schools, and how it was it was ever growing field of the educational institutions, right? The English in the convent schools, right? So here we have the regional languages and versus the English. And though English was very much, it has a very limited access to the layman, right? And only very elite people, only the educated people, they have the access to the English, right? Because they only the rich people, right, the elite people, they are going to the schools, and they are going to the convent schools, and there they can learn the English, right? But after the independence, right, when we set up the democratic country, the independent democratic country, so there we have the formula of three language formula. So first was the official language, second was the regional language, and then we have the English as the language of communication, right? So because we have this multilingual and this multicultural tradition, right? So we have different states, we have different languages, different regions, right? So it would not be appropriate to have one language formula, right? Because we have different regions, and on the other hand, even in the different states, we have a different kind of a dialects as well, right? So the kind of Punjabi people speak in the you could say in Chandigarh, or in the region of Malwa, is completely different from the kind of Punjabi people speak in the Amritsar, right? So because of the because of the dialect. We have different dialects even in one language. So because we are actually having a multilingual country, we are actually having a multicultural country. We have a lot of religions, right? So we have already talked about that, how we are setting up a democratic country, right, consisting of Hindu, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, and even Christians as well, right? So Buddhist, Sikhs, right? So this was the reason that in order to build a democratic country, so they opted for the three language formula. So this three language formula, right? So in three languages, so first was definitely the official language, right? That was the Rashtra Bhasha, that was the Hindi. Second was, because it was spoken by, because gradually Sanskrit was totally wiped out from the scene, and from Sanskrit we have, because Sanskrit was actually a prestigious language, and on the other hand, Sanskrit was not accessible to the common man, right? Because we have already discussed that how it was just the Brahmins who were entitled to perform the priestly duties, right? It was just the Brahmins who are entitled to read the Ved and Puran, right? So Sanskrit was never ever a language of the common man, right? So it was actually a language of the elites. Same goes with the English, right? So this was the reason that common man, so Hindi was actually a modern version of the Sanskrit, right? So Hindi came from the Sanskrit, right? So this was the reason Hindi was opted as the Rashtra Bhasha. And then we have the regional languages, and then the third language would be English, right? So as the language of communication, right? Because it has entered enough into the fabric of the India that it gradually became the language of communication, right? So this was the reason that from two to three language formula, right? So there will be the reason that there will be the literatures in the all the three languages, right? So we have equally the rich tradition, rich literature in the, you could say, in the Hindi, and then we have the rich literatures in the regional language as well, right? Now when we were talking about Bengali literature, when we were talking about Tamil or Kannada literature, and we were talking about Gujarati literature, we were talking about the Punjabi literature, right? So we have a rich tradition of literatures in the regional language as well. Same goes with the Hindi as well. When we talking about the English literature in India, right? So it is different from what we have the literature of Hindi literature, or what we have the literature of the regional language literature. So before explaining, I would like to know that what do you think, that what kind of a literature would be having that time, right? That how you perceive English in India. Do you think that English is that much important in India, and how English enjoyed the status, how English entered and enjoyed the status of the language of communication? I hope you are well and you are able to explain, Shushmita. There is no not any kind of compulsion for you if you are not well.
No, ma'am, I'm well now.
Okay, Shushmita. So can you please share with me that how do you perceive English in India, right? So are you in the favor that how we just landed into this some kind of a foreign language? It just landed into our culture, and it just entered enough, and we are writing, we are talking, we are discussing, we are having discourse in the in a different completely foreign language, right? So how do you perceive that the status of English in India?
Ma'am, I think English is very important because English is one of the most important languages in the world. Also, uh, by by reading English, by learning English, we can have access to the literature of the other countries also. If we keep our focus only on the Sanskrit or Hindi, will not be able to have that access in literature or in science to the that other world has.
Okay.
So I think English is very important.
True, very true. I also agree with you, right? So we were talking about the same point that we will be discussing the next point, right? So you were talking about that how with the help of English we are able to learn other languages, right? But before, and how you even mentioned your point of view, even mentioned the few traces of translation as well. That how because of the English we are able to study the translations all over the world, because it is the lingua franca, right? So common language that was spoken across the across the world, right? So even there less of the native speakers are there, right? So the English is actually is the second language of the people who are not at all even the natives of the European countries, right? So same goes because of the colonization, right? So here we will be talking about that how the English entered into the social political fabric of the India, and and gradually, it enjoyed the, status of the language of communication. So within the, three language formula, right? The reason is, quite simple, that it has, it has already entered into the fabric. And because of the, we bear the brunt of colonization. So we Indians, we, in the modern democratic country, so we have this, a kind of, you could say, we kind of this attraction towards English, right? So we have this attraction towards English. Nowadays it is very common, right? So the millennials, kids, they are very much, they are very much familiar, and they are very much, comfortable in speaking with English. But had it been, 20 or 30 years back, still people, look at people in the awe, those who are speaking in English, right? And somebody who is speaking in English will be considered, the most intelligent person, right? So he may be considered that he knows all, right? So the man, he knows everything, he knows it all, right? So he is the omniscient, right? So we still have the, fascination about the English, right? So this was the reason also that English was actually, included in the, in the three language formula. And second thing, as you have already mentioned, that how, we can, read across the idea of the translation, right? Because it was not just us, right? Not just India, or not just the ancient continent, right? So it was, Britishers, we know it very well, that how the Europeans, right, they conquered most of the world, right? So they conquered most of the world, and, in their conquest, right? So so they left their traces in all over the world, right? So not even us, it was just about, all over, many countries of the globe, many countries across the world, those who are, writing and reading, they have their, they have doing their things in the English as well, right? So this was the reason that, when we were talking about the three language formula, right? So the first thing is definitely the idea of communication, and second thing, and third thing, because it became the library language, right? Because all the, important information, the encyclopedias, right, be it scriptures, right? So everything was translated in English. And even, even when you search on any website, when we search of any engine, right? So we are able to find any kind of information in English only, right? So whenever, any kind of a definition, right? So for example, if you search a simple definition of what is a night, right? So the definition of night is even available in English only. So how it became the language of, library language, right? So because it gives you access to the knowledge, right? So it gives access to the, all the educational resources, right? That was actually in the, in the English only, right? And because of the, printing press was actually, the, you could say, it was initiated, or it was actually started in, by the Britishers in all over the country where they have colonization. So this was too the reason that they, they promoted, they propagated their own language, and it became the, library language, right? And when we were talking about, about the India, right? So we have already, apart from the fascination, and moreover, we really want to, grow up as a country. So this was the reason that, our bent of mind, our bent towards the, reading the Western scholars. Because when we talk about, India, so we our writings are more or less, for example, we were discussing, Ramayana and Mahabharata, that how the epics, right? So they were the we in India, we have this mystical tradition, right? So we were actually, having the mystical and philosophical writing, right? So not we, so the advent of the, Western logic, right? So the Western rationale, right? So the Western revolution, right? So such kind of ideas, ideas of Marx, be it the ideas of, and a socialist, right? So such kind of ideas, that we really want to opt from the Western part of the world. We really want to opt from the Western scholars in order to build a democratic country, right? So this was to the reason. And when we were talking about Indian writing in English, right? So we categorized Indian writing in English in two parts, right? So first were the Anglo-Indian writers, and second were the Indo-Anglican writers. Have you heard these terms before?
Yes, ma'am.
So can you differentiate between these two terms, Anglo-Indian writer and Indo-Anglican writers?
Ma'am, Anglo-Indians means who were English people but writing with the themes related to the India,
Okay, good,
and
very good.
Indo-Anglicans were those who were Indians but writing in English.
Okay, and can you differentiate between their writings? What do you feel that? What is the difference in their writing? They both were writing in English, right? But what is the difference
Yes.
between their writing?
Uh,
Okay, no problem.
I don't have the exact idea, but what I feel is the Anglo Indians were not writing with the same kind of sympathy. They were not writing about that about the problems at that level. But when an Indo Anglican was writing, he read about he read with the sympathy, and he write with sympathy and write in depth about the problems faced by the people at that time due to
Okay.
English people.
Okay, very good, Shushmita. Right. So you have already, familiar with these two terms, Anglo-Indian writers and Indo-Anglican writers. So first part of writing, that sprang in the Indian English, Indian English writing, or in the domain of English Indian writing, that was Anglo-Indian writers, right? So English people, right? So Anglo-English people, those who are residing in the India, right? They are living in the India. So these were basically the Britishers, right? The colonial masters, right? Or on the other hand, these were you could say, the British officials of the East India Company, right? So when we were talking about the Anglo-Indian writers, right? So you have already mentioned that they must not be aware of the the Indianness, the Indian sensibility, and they will definitely not write with the sympathy, with the compassion, and definitely because they were alien to our culture, they were completely foreign to our culture, right? Because their culture and our culture, we have already discussed in elaboration, right? When we were talking about the syntactical structures of English and Sanskrit, right? So and even I highlighted that how because they have different syntactical structures, their and they have a different culture as well, right? So this was the reason that Anglo-Indian writers, right? So when they first landed into India, right, especially the Asian continent, they find India as an exotic land, right? Because the kind of weather, the kind of culture they have in the Europe, right? So that was completely different from India, right? The country, the country who is actually soaked in the the sunlight, right? So there they can enjoy the crisp white shirt, right? So there they can enjoy the excess heat. So this was the reason that they find that India is an exotic land with so much of greenery and with so many weathers, right? So we have the different kind of weathers, as compared to the Europe. And then they have seen the mystical traditions, right? So we have the culture of we have the cultures of Babas, Farids, saints, right? So saints, yogis, right? So that time when they landed here, right? So this was the reason that their writings were more or less the exotic representation of India, right? So they represented India as an exotic land, in the landscape of the you could say in the landscape of the world, right? So same goes with even with the African, with the Africans, right? How they portrayed that they are the savage, they are the brutes. But on the other hand, when they came to the India, and definitely the color discrimination was there, right? So we were not that they don't consider Indians, or you could say the Asians, not that much brutish or savage comparatively to the Africans, but they still carry this such kind of image, and they portray India as a kind of exotic land, right? So with the different kind of crops, with different kind of weather, right? So this was the reason, with the different kind of cultural practices as well, because we have so many traditions, we have so many festivals, right? With different kind of a language as well, right? So this was the reason they portrayed India as a exotic land. And mainly they were talking about when they write the letters, right? When they write the letters, and when they were talking about the India, right? They were talking about prosaic manner. So they were talking about how India is actually a country of jugglers and charmers, right? So they were actually writing about India, right? So how India is an exotic land. It was more or less just the country of jugglers, right? So there we have jugglers, there we have magicians, there we have yogis, there we have babas, there we have some fakirs, right? Those who are indulged in a kind of a magics as well, right? So they for the first time they were seeing these things with their naked eyes, right? So this was the reason that the Anglo-Indian writings, right? So they were actually more or less the they were the exotic representations of the India, right? So they were not talking about the real picture of the India, the in-depth study. They don't have the first-hand information, right? They don't have the they have the first-hand experience with the India, and they are continuously judging it under the Western lenses, right? They were constantly judging us, right? They were constantly and apart from judging us, they were portraying the Indians from their own sensibility, from the Western sensibility, from the point of view of logic and rationale, and rather than from the lenses of the cultural and the traditional point of view, right? So this was the reason that their writings were the more or less, they were actually they have the colonial reflections. But when we were talking about the Indo-Anglican writers, right, so they were the Indians basically, those who are, those who are educated, those who read English in the convent schools, or somebody who went abroad and they got graduated themselves, they got them graduated themselves there, and they come back to India, and they were, or they are writing about India there, right? So these people are definitely the elite people, right? Because we have already discussed that how English was a language of, a prestigious language, just limited to the elite people in the India in the starting, right? So the Indo-Anglican writing, so were the writings, right? So where they were talking about the, where they were talking about the India, right? So from the Indian sensibility, right? So these writers were talking about. But on the other hand, even when we're talking about Indo-Anglican writers, so Indo-Anglican writer also, it also, it suffers from the three phases, right? It comes out from the three phases, because the basic Indian writings, right, the basic Indians who were writing in the English, so that was ultimately the imitation, right? So imitative writings, for example, we hear, we discuss the Aristotle's idea of imitation, right? So what Westerns were writing that time, so they were simply quoting, following the structure, they have the same form as the formation of the Anglo-Indian writers, right? So they were not more or less different at the initial age, right? So they were simply imitating the West. They were simply imitating the ideas of the Anglo-Indian writers, right? Just to, because it was not their, it was not their first language, right? So it was not the language that they acquired, it was the language that they learned as the second language, right? And specifically, they don't have much exposure to use this language, right? Because the kind of society they are living, the kind of people they have around, so they don't have that much exposure to this kind of a language. So their writings, the first phase of their initial phase of their writing was the imitation, right? So they were obviously, they were following the structure, the form, even the concerns were more or less same with the writers of the Anglo-Indian writers. And then come the second phase, that was the redefinition, right? So redefinition, where they started, they started, contemplating, they started interpreting the things under their own lenses, where they, where they come out of the age of imitation, and they really want to write something on their own, and they can see that how West is actually, oppressing them, that how West is, actually, judging them, and constantly, humiliating them, mocking at them, right? So that then come the second phase of redefinition, where they are redefining the standards, where they are redefining the ideals, where they are redefining the, the whole image of the India in front of the, in front of India, and even in front of the world as well, right? And then come the third phase, that was the self discovery. And here we can actually, see that the sprung, the rise of the Indian English writing, right? So the third phase of was the self discovery, so where they started writing about their own concerns, they were writing about the harsh realities, right, of the India. They were talking about the concerns of the real concerns of the India, for example, the democracy, the independent, the kind of the image of the independent India, right? So the discovery, right? The third phase was the discovery, right? So the three figures that emerged when we talk about the Indian English writing, right? So these were the, for example, uh, Kathapura by Raja Rao, right? So we were talking about Raja Rao, then we were talking about R.K. Narayan, and then the third definitely was Mulk Rajanand, right? I hope you must be aware of these writers,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So you must have even
Yes,
read
ma'am.
about, right? So you must have read Raja Rao's Kanthapura, then the Mulk Rajanand's Kuli or Untouchable, and equally, Alki Narayan's, the Guide and the Malgudi Tales, right? That how they were actually portraying India in the true sense, right? So they were talking about the Indianness of the India, right? They were talking, they were actually portraying the Indian sensibility, be it in the, how R.K. Narayan was actually, talking about the child psychology, and especially Indian child psychology, right? The mischievous Indian, Indian kids, right? And on the other hand, that too under the setup of the Malgudi Tales, right? The setting of, setting up of the South. And then we were talking about, the Kanthapura, that how Raja Rao was talking about in writing in the Indian English, right? He's sitting in the France, but he was writing in the Indian English, and he was, using the phrases, right? The very very common phrases that we used in Hindi and we use in the our regional language, and he's, converting the same phrases in the English, right? And then we were talking about, the when we will if we talk about same goes with the, Mulk Rajanan, that how he was, becoming the voice of the voiceless, how he was actually portraying the concerns of the untouchable, right? His characters were very much, layman. They don't have, they are not the gods, so they were, actually started talking about, the layman, the common people, right? common people, their concerns, right? So what are their immediate concerns in India, right? So they are the people, right? The Indo-Anglican writers in the third phase, right? That was the self-discovery. They were the ultimate, they were actually the you could say the initiators of the Indian writing in English, right? So they were the one who are actually talking about India, Indian sensibility, Indianness in the true sense, right? And from that, they then came, the different phases, right? So even when we talk about uh, Indian English writing, right? So and even we talk about the three genres, right? So first was the poetry, the prose and the drama. So the novel, and so when we talk about the most popular genre in especially in the Indian English writing, that was definitely the novels, right? So there was a plethora of the novels that were written, right? So because people were actually because in India they were educated in English, so this was the reason that they are able to write it, right? So this is a very common trend, today as well, right? So there are a lot of people, those who are able to write in English, they are able to read in English, and but they are not able to speak in English, and right, they are not able to comprehend the English easily, right? So it was very easy for them to write in English or read in English, right? Because if you study from the point of view of English translation method, read that how English was taught in the schools or colleges of the India through the grammar translation method, right? So it was not meant for the way of communication, so it was taught by the way of translation, right? So the mind of the Indians, when it comes to the domain of the English, so it works under the method of the translation, right? So this was the reason that the novel flourished all across India, especially in the domain of the English writings, right? And then we come to the poetry, and even poetry too flourished in the India, the English poetry, right? So we have a lot of Indian English poets, and more or less they were talking about their autobiographical elements. For example, if you read the poetry of the Kamla Das, right, the confessional poetry of the Kamla Das, right? So the poetry that flourished in Indian English, so that was definitely the confessional poetry, the autobiographical poetry, because it was just limited to the, you could say, the emotive, it was just emerged as the emotive language, right? The emotive language, they try to pour out their emotions, right? So when we were talking about the poetry, and then the third genre was the drama, right? So it wasn't flourished much in India. What do you think, Sushmita, the reason behind that? And do you agree with me that drama, we haven't seen often the Indian English plays, or how many English plays in India you are aware of, you must have seen, or there are advertisements in the English plays in India? What do you think that the drama hasn't flourished the way poetry and novel flourished in India, especially in English?
I have no idea about it. But what I think is poetry and novels are something that you can read, but drama is something that has to be performed on the stage, and I think it needs a lot more preparation. It need a lot more financial help. Uh, and people have to get out of their home to watch it.
Okay. Uh, there are a few points, right? I would definitely agree with you, Sushmita, because when we were talking about the drama, right? So drama, the very first thing that we go to see theater, we go to see cinema, and we go to see any theatrical act. That is because of the identification, right? So the first thing that why drama doesn't flourish in India much, because of the language, right? Definitely the diction, right? We can only identify with the characters, right? When we feel that they are as equal or as same as us. So the basic thing is, if somebody somebody is speaking in English, right? So definitely people will not have the first hand connection with the person, right? So because of the diction, because of the language, and same goes with the characters as well, right? So Indian actors, right? Indian actors were not comfortable in the English script, right? And in the English script, and on the other hand, if we talk about Indian drama, right? So I have already mentioned that how Indian drama was all about the leelas, right? So so we love to see the leelas, right? So be it Ram Leela, or be it the different leelas of the Lord Krishna, right? So the basic drama, you could say, the dominant drama in India was definitely the Vedic literature, right? So the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So people were not able to digest Lord Rama speaking in English. Bhim and the different Pandavas were having conversation in English, right? So it would be outrageous for them. It would be like they are distorting the narratives, right? So they are distorting the narratives, and even they are disrespecting their gods, right? So because this was the reason that Indian English drama doesn't flourish much because of the themes and because of the diction, and even even because of the lack of the characters as well. We don't have the characters who can memorize the script, and then they can then they can speak fluently with the gestures and with the and they can carry the role. They will simply be anxious on the stage, that they will forget the dialogues in the English. They will forget the dialogues in the English, right? There might be some tongue, there will be some tongue twister, or there will be they will forgot the lines in between, right? So this was the reason that the drama doesn't flourish much as as much poetry and novel. And same goes with you have already mentioned that how we can read, right? So we can read and write novel easily, right? So if we have if we are writing and reading English. But I have already told you that how the speaking, when we were talking about LSRW, right? So listening and speaking skills are how the Indians they have this weak skills, and especially when it comes to listening and speaking, right? So this was the reason that the drama wasn't flourished that much. But when we were talking about the mainstream, right, Indian English writings, right? So they were the mainstream, the dominant writings were definitely, right, the upper caste people, because they were the elitist people, right? So they were the elitist people, so they have the access to the education. And then gradually, right, so we have already discussed in the last lecture that how writings from the margin. So it was where he came, right, where we came in Indian English, when we were talking about the domain of the Indian English, right? The writings, right, the margins writing, right, the poetics of the margins, right? So they creeped up in the fabric of the Indian English writing, right? So that was all about we were talking about the contemporary Indian literatures in the English translation. So English translation, translation emerged when with the advent of the regional literature, right? So we have talked about the three language formula, that we have the writings in the Hindi, and then we have the regional literature, right? So in order to read, comprehend, and in order to understand the regional literature, so this was the reason that these translation studies came into existence, right? So we can only, it is very difficult to learn Punjabi in 10 days. It was very difficult to learn the Gujarati drama, Gujarati play, Gujarati poetry. It is very difficult to read Bengali literature. It is very difficult to read something which is written in Tamil or Kannada. So it would be easy if we read the same thing in the translation in English, right? So because of that translation studies came into existence, right? But when we were talking about translation, right? So and one more thing, that in English, when we were talking about the English, right? So it was taught by the way of translation method, right? So this was the reason that these translation studies, right, they gather movement in the India, right? It gather momentum. That when But on the other hand, the basic thing with the translation studies, what I feel is the two things. That is, first of all, it is very difficult to completely rely on the translation, right? Because there are few critics, there are few scholars, right, who are actually of the point that somewhere the true essence of the writing will be it will get lost under the flow of the translation, right? So because a lot of things that depends upon the translator as well, right? So what kind of the kind of command he has over the two languages, right? So when we were talking about the translation studies, so the role of the translator was very much crucial, right? And second was definitely the nature of the translation, right? So whether it is a free translation or whether it is a literal translation, right? So if a person is doing a literal translation, right, complete word to word translation, or he's just doing the free translation, right? So because in the free translation there must be elements of you could say discrepancy, and also there is a lot of elements of dishonesty as well, right? So somebody can write his own narrative on the under the guise of writing a translation writing, right? So the nature of translation also matters when it comes to translation studies. So whether it is a free translation or the literal translation. And moreover, we have already discussed that how about the different syntactical structures between the Hindi has, and same goes with the English as well, right? So even the if we look clear, you could say closely at the syntactical structures of the Hindi and English, so it has a complete different structures, right? For example, in English, for example, right? So I'm quoting a line. Uh, we do our homework, right? So we is the subject, do is the verb, and our homework is definitely the object, right? So there is a subject, there is an object, and we put the verb in between in order to form a connection. And on the other hand, right? So in order to form a connection, or in order to build a relationship between subject and object with the help of the verb, right? So verb will be in the middle. But if you write the same line in the Hindi, so we do our homework, so we are duty, we do our homework. So in Hindi it would be like हम अपना काम करते हैं, तो हम is the subject, अपना काम is the object. Or in Hindi, we put the verb at the end of the sentence, right? In every sentence we never put hum karta hai apna kaam. So right, so that is completely an incorrect sentence in the Hindi grammar, right? So you could see that how they have a different syntactical structures, right? So the literal translation is not at all possible in a lot of in a lot of cases, right? So this was the reason that the translation studies are there are a lot of setbacks, and there are a lot of critics that they were not in the favor of translation writings, right? And same goes with some words and phrases, right? So there are a lot of words and phrases in the different vocabulary. They have every language has its own words and phrases. Every language has its own vocabulary. And very important thing that translation is also not at all when it comes to the free translation, that it is not at all an innocent activity, right? Because if we say that it is a free translation, so there might be chances of more and more dishonesty, right? So there's somebody will write his own narrative, his or her own narrative, rather than the translation, right? And and even when we were talking about Indian English, right? So the focus will be on, so when the advent of the translation writing, so the focus was on the Indian English. So they were talking about that we should not follow the structure form of the the British English or the American English, right? So the focus was on the development of the Indian English. So what we were actually we were actually having a discourse, how we are speaking, how we are reading, how we are understanding the English. So for the translation studies in India, especially in the in the connection of the especially in the connection of the English, right? So if this title of our course, that was the contemporary Indian literatures, right? So the Indian literature in English translation was actually focusing on the Indian English, right? So we are actually emerging a new language, emerging a new aesthetic, like we were talking about the Dalit aesthetic. So we were also talking about we are also building a new language, as we were talking about the translation studies, the Indian English, right? So even if you search the you could say the pronunciation of plumber nowadays, it was actually showing you three pronunciations, right? So rather than plumber, it was also showing plumber as the Indian English, right? So this is how we are actually we are devising a new language, a new standardized language for our own nation, with the help of translation. And definitely it is going to enhance our knowledge on the different regional literatures. We are able to read the different regional literatures. For example, if you are not aware of Punjabi, and if you are not aware of Kannada, so you must not be able to read Changyaruk, or you are not able to read Sangati by Bama. But with the help of English, with the help of translation, with the help of Indian English, right? So you are able to read that text. So today also we will be reading, right? So we will be reading Samaskara by U.R. Ananthamurthy. I hope this much is clear. Do you have any question?
No, ma'am, it's clear.
Okay, so today we will be talking about Samaskara, a rite for a dead man, right? So basically, it is a novel, right? A big bulky novel by U.R. Ananthamurthy. So have you read this novel or heard about this novel?
Ma'am, I have read the summary.
Okay, very good. So can you quickly give me your point of view, that how do you perceive the novel? What is your interpretation, that how do you understand the novel Samaskara? The connotations the title would be having in the link with its summary.
Ma'am, I have read it a long time back. Right now, I don't remember, but I know the crux of the novel. That there is someone from the upper caste, and she tries to do the last rites of a low caste person.
Okay, okay, okay. So basically, first of all, let's comprehend the title, right? So Samaskara, Samaskara, a rite for a dead man, right? As the after the colon, a rite for the dead man, it makes clear that they are actually doing the they are actually talking about the death ceremony, the funeral ceremony of a dead man, right? So death or funeral ceremony of a man, right, who is dead, right? So it is a kind of rite. They were talking about a ritual, right? So basically, samaskara is a Sanskrit word, right? So in a
Yes.
popular, in a popular Hindi, in a modernized Hindi, you were talking about sanskar, right? Sanskar is what we call, right, the funeral ceremony. I hope I am correct, Sushmita, right?
Yes, ma'am.
In the yeah, right, in the colloquial language, right? So when we were performing the the ritual, the funeral rites of a person, so we used to say that we are doing the sanskar, right? And even the the cards, right, the sanskar ceremony, people used to circulate on the WhatsApp nowadays, right? So they were talking about the sanskar ceremony. So samaskara is basically the the original term, right, the Sanskritized term for the sanskar, right, the original term for the sanskar, right? So here we have the three important characters when we were talking about, right? So first is our Parneshacharya, second is the Nirnapa, and third is the Chandri, right? So these are the three important characters, right? So the story, the story more or less mentions about these people, right? So definitely the protagonist, or you could say the central hero of our character. So but on the other hand, even this even this novel you can read under the postmodern lenses, that how we don't have a hero here, because if you read the character Panesha Chara, it has a lot of different dynamics, right? So at first, he seems to be a very pious man, but on the other man, he is the same man who will be succumb to the desires, he will be succumb to the lust, and then in the end, the person emerged as a completely different person, right? So there are a lot of different dynamics, there are different phases of the character of the Praneshacharya. So we can simply, so it same goes with the postmodern era, right? So when we were talking about postmodern or post-truth era, that there is no hero, right? No hero, or the anti-hero we were talking about, right? And nobody is a kind of a complete, a character who is completely in black and white. So all are in the grays, right? So same goes with the Praneshacharya, right? So here we have Praneshacharya, right? So Praneshacharya is a Brahmin, is a Brahmin who lives in the small village of Durvasapura, right? So Durvasapura was actually Angarahara, so that was actually closed community, right? So you know it very well because of the rigid structures. We have already mentioned that how the rigid structures, that was mentioned in the Manu Samriti about the four varnas, right? So here we have the character of Parneshacharya. So he is said to be, a very, pious man, a respected man, a very educated man, who knows all the Vedas and who has, all the training. So this was the reason that people used to call him, in the respect Acharya, right? Acharya. Acharya was actually, a kind of a term that was used to denote the guru, right? The guru, the teacher, right? So in Sanskrit, we used to say, instead of saying sir and ma'am, so sir and ma'am is actually the colonial words for the teachers. So in the ancient India, we used to donate our teachers with the acharya, right? So here we have the acharya, Praneshacharya, because he's the one who will be resolving or doing all the rites, be it if somebody is born, Janeu, or so, Janeu ceremony, the birth ceremony, naming ceremony, or the rite of the death person, the funeral ceremonies, right? So it was all everything, the famous functions, right, the popular, the traditional and the ritual practices that will be performed by the Parneshacharya, right? And then and when we were talking about Parneshacharya, right, so Parneshacharya is living with his wife, right? So he's living with his wife, that was Bhagirthi, right? So Bhagirthi is actually not you could say a common woman, right? So people are used to saying he's a half woman, right? So half woman. So Bhagirthi was actually handicapped, right? And Praneshacharya deliberately married her, right? So Praneshacharya was married to Bhagirthi because he really wants to attain salvation, right? We know it very well. The very concept of the salvation, that the more you suffer, right, your tears or your or your the service or you're, the more you submit to the will of God, at the, at the face of adversities, at the, at the face of destiny, only then you are able to achieve salvation. So Pranesha Charya was doing, all the, all the service, for the, for the Bhagirthi, who is actually a bedridden, who is totally bedridden and handicapped woman, right? And the first reason was that, right? So this was the reason that he married Bhagirthi, because he really wants to serve Bhagirthi, and he has the idea that by serving Bhagirthi, he is actually serving the God, right? And in the end, he is able to achieve salvation. And second thing is definitely because he really wants to, become a celibate, right? Because she's a half woman. Constantly, if you read the novel, so constantly this phrase was, creeps up again and again. So because, she was a handicapped woman, she was a bedridden, so this was the reason that he is not able to, have a physical discourse with the woman. And this was the reason that, he is going to have, a control over his sexual desires. He is going to have a control over his, the one of the sins, which is actually, creating a rift for the priestly duties. So this was the reason, right? So he was, he married Bhagirthi on the name of service and on the name of, remaining celibate. So this was also the reason that why he was actually, respected as the, most reverend, and why he is respected as the pious and the most, wise person of the village of the Durvasapura, right? So these reasons he enjoyed, a good reputation, right? A very good reputation in the village, right? And because but on the other hand, there is a complete different, right? So we have Pranesha Charya, an extremely, extremely good and pious man, right? So if we look at Pranesha Charya from, at very first glance, so he emerged as an ideal man, right? An ideal Brahmin, right? So ideal Brahmin, who is, who is dedicating his life with, to perform the priestly duties, in the, in the you could say, in the name of, God, in the name of Brahma, he is doing the duty, and he is actually, controlling all his desires, and, and he will be, in the end, he will be attaining the salvation. And then you have a complete different character, right? That was the Narnappa, right? So Narnappa is a complete, a different character, complete, you could say the other side of the Parnishacharya as well, right? So he too is a Brahmin, right? Because they were talking about the Brahmin community. So he too is a Brahmin, but on the other hand, he is somebody who is alcoholic. He is too, prone to gambling, and on the other hand, Narnappa he was actually, discarded by the Brahmins of the Durvasapura. Nobody, was actually having on the, talking terms with Narnappa, because he has a rumored, a rumored girlfriend that they, it was said to be the concubine, right? So the term, with the Chandri, right? So the people have this, the interpretation that Narnappa was in love. Narnappa was actually living with the Dalit, right? So you could say the relationship was totally, was not at all acceptable in the Brahmin structure. So we have already talked about, right, that how, they were not in the favor of, so there was no provision of intercaste marriage. If we talk about, the Varna system, the ancient India, so such kind of a relationship is totally unacceptable in the eyes of the Brahmin community, especially in the, eyes of the people who are living in the community, right? So they have discarded, Narnappa, and they were not at all in the, talking terms with Narnappa, and because the reason is definitely Chandri, right? So people say that the relationship is totally illegal, right? So the relationship is totally, unacceptable, right? So it was not at all acceptable for a Brahmin to have a, to have a relationship with the Dalit, right? So especially the, the Dalit woman. So in this way, they were feeling that Nanappa is actually, Nanappa was, crossing the limits, right? So Nanappa was actually, disrespecting the religion, disrespecting our caste, and disrespecting our community as well. So this was the reason. But on the other hand, when we talk about the Samaskara, so it was actually the death of Narnappa. And on a very superficial story we talk about, right? So it was, so Narnappa was dead now, and it was the funeral rites of the Narnappa, right? So we were talking about the Samaskara. So it was the Samaskara or the Sanskar ceremony of the Narnappa, right? So we know it very well. We will be aware of. We are aware of the the funeral ceremony in the Hindu religion, that Hindu believes, I believe, in constantly, fortnightly, they have the rituals, right? They have the rituals, they perform it very rigorously. And there was a tradition that if after the cremation of the dead body, they'll have their meal, right? They'll have their first meal, the community, right? The community will have the first meal after the cremation of the body, right? I hope you must be aware of this fact, Sushmita.
No.
Okay. Usually it happens in all the communities nowadays, right? So the people, if there is a death in somebody's house, in the somebody's family, so after cremating, or after the last rites of the family, of the person, the whole family will have a meal together, right? So whole family will have a that too, a simple meal, right? The roti and dal they have used to have. So same, that originates from the Brahmin community, because they are said to be the ultimate, torch bearers of the ideals. They were actually the creators of the rules and norms. So in Brahmin community, they used to have that whenever somebody dies in their community, when a Brahmin dies, so after the cremation ceremony, after the samaskar, right? So after the samaskar, so they will have the meal. Because they will have the meal only after the samaskar, right, for a dead man. Now it makes sense to you. But the problem here is, the main conflict in the novel was that Narnapa doesn't have a family, right? And on the other hand, on the name of family, he just have Chandri, right? And that too, she's a Dalit woman, right? So she's a Dalit, she's a low caste woman, right? So and moreover, she's a woman. You know it very well that only the cremation ceremony, the last rites will be performed by a man, right? So either it is going to
Yes.
be a father, either it is going to be the son or brother, right? Somebody from the somebody, the male, right? It was totally male centered, right? So that they will shave the head of that person who is going to had the cremation. You know it very well, after the cremation, the person will they will shave their heads, and they will have their they will have their separate, you could say, they will have their separate bed, where they will they will eat, they will not leave the place, they will have to be here for whole of the, I believe, for the fortnight, for the 15 days to 30 days, right? So 13 days to 13 to 15 days, right? So they have the whole custom. But nobody is there to perform the last rites or samaskar of the Narnappa. So the thing is that nobody will eat, right, till the dead body of Narnappa will be cremated, right? So this was all about the conflict of the story, right? So the whole story centers around the Nanappa's last rites, right? That how Nanappa is going to be cremated, and who will cremate the Nanappa, who will perform the last rites of the Nanappa, right? So who is actually a dead man, right? So the first thing, that the first interpretation, the obvious interpretation is that how the very dominant theme is the caste, that how caste is very much prevalent in the novel, right? So though he is so Narnappa, right? So Narnappa is not at all a Brahmin by his actions, right? So because for a Brahmin, one should be abstains alcohol, drinking, gambling, and such kind of relationships he has with the Chandri. So so he is not at all Brahmin by his actions. If we look at the Varna system, that the upper caste, especially the first Varna, that is Brahmins, they have to they have to perform the priestly duties, right? So Narnappa is not at all performing any priestly duties as compared to the Purneshacharya, right? So Purneshacharya is the epitome of the ideal Brahmin, right? So because he is the one who is actually performing the the duties, duties in a very in the ideal way, that he is actually a priest as well. He is he's a Brahmin, he is a priest, and on the other hand, he married a Brahmin woman, and that too being so much he himself he was an educated educated in the Veds and Purans, and even after educated, and even after becoming the most respected person, he decides to marry a handicapped woman. So he is that ideal man, right? So on the other hand, Pranesha Charya in the starting of the novel was too much ideal, which makes Narnappa, that cast Narnappa in too much of bad light, right? So so at a first sight, we contempt. We totally, we feel contempt for the Narnappa, that what kind of a person he is, right? So when we compare to the Pranesha Charya, right? So Pranesha Charya is too good, But on the other hand, Nirnapa is the one who actually, who is not at all, if we look at his actions. So, but on the other hand, though he is not performing any kind of a priestly duty, so he is not performing any, he was not indulging any kind of, the priestly duties, or he is not following the constructions of the Varna system, or the Brahmin society, the norms and the norms and laws, the rules of Brahmin society. But still, right, he will be a Brahmin even after his death, right? So nobody can nobody can perform nobody can perform the last rites other than the Brahmin. So the very dominant theme was the caste, that how caste was very much prevalent in the India, right? So when we were talking about this, the small village, that how caste was so much prevalent. So even after bad deed, the misdeeds, right? So you will be revered, you will enjoy the status of the Brahmin, right? So how it was all about, so what we discussed, about the Varna system, that how people used to people used to have these arguments, people used to have this when we were talking about the casteism in the India. So people used to say that it was all about the Varna system. But here, there was no distinction about the Varna system. Here it was solely about the caste, right? So because he belongs to a particular caste, right? So this was the reason that the whole rites of the last rites of the Nirnapa, right? So it was still in the question that who will perform the duty of the Nirnapa, right? So, and the only one he has on the name of the relations, that was a Chandri, and she was a she was a lower caste woman. And second thing, Chandri was a female, right? So he is not allowed to perform the last rites, right? And the people, right? So the whole question was of the Samaskara of the Nirnapa. So the people, all the people of the village, right? Because they were Brahmin community, as I have already told you, that they have to have the last meal after the Samaskara, after the cremation ceremony. So they went to Parneshacharya to seek the guidance, right? So they went to Parneshacharya, that Parneshacharya is the ultimate, so he is the ultimate, priest of our village. He is the highest, the highest reputed, highest reputed person in our community. So he is the most revered one. So he will decide, right? We will follow whatever he will decide, right? So he will decide that, you know that who will you perform the last rites, right? So they all turns up to the Parneshacharya, right? So to make a decision that regarding the Nirnapa's funeral rites, right? And the rites were typically, as you know it very well, that it was typically performed by the family members only. And on the other hand, and except the family members and nobody, right? Nobody will perform. And on the other, in the case of Nirnapa, nobody is even ready to perform the last rites of the Nirnapa. Because if they will come forward to perform the last rites of Nirnapa, then definitely they will face the criticism of the other of the community, right? So people will definitely will cast the person in the same light of the Nirnapa, that maybe that person is also like Nirnapa, right? And he too will be, he's having the bad character, right? And when we are talking about the relatives, so definitely when Nirnapa has the relatives, that is he has two relatives, that is Garuda and Lakshman, right? So first of all, when we were talking about the last right, so it was Chandri, right? So Chandri approached Garud and Lakshman, right? So because but on the other hand, if you read about the relationship between Nirnapa and Chandri, so this was we have already talked about Satish and Hema. So same goes with Nirnapa and Chandri. So they were also the star-crossed lovers, right? But on the other hand, if you read the novel, you feel that Chandri's love was very much pure for the Nirnapa, right? So because she was the only one, right? When we read the novel, so we'll got to know that she was the only one who was actually putting all the efforts, right, for the Samaskara of the Nirnapa. She was begging somebody. She was she was actually begging Garud and Lakshman. Then she was requesting the people of the village. She went to plead Praneshacharya, for the last rites of the Nirnapa. So in this sense, the only person that truly deserved the right that she should perform the last rites, that was the That was the Chandri, right? But on the other hand, Garud and Lakshman. So we would be talking about the Brahmin community here, right? So basically, the whole novel portrays the hypocrisy about the Brahmin community, right? The Brahmin setup, right? The Brahminical society, right? And the casteist mindset, definitely the casteist mindset, and they were also talking about the rigid rules, right? So basically, if even when we're talking about if Narnappa doesn't have anyone, so ultimately the right will be bestowed upon the Chandri, right, to have the last rite performed by Narnappa, because it will be definitely, by writing, or by understanding, it would be someone, right, the person who, the dead person who loves the most, and somebody who loves the dead person most. I believe that only that person is entitled to perform the last rites, right? But on the other hand, because of the strict rules, right, strict rules and strict norms of the Brahmin society, right, strict norms of the Brahmin community, that how last rites will be performed by a male and how last rites will be performed by a family member only. So the whole thing of Samaskar of the Narnappa got delayed and delayed, right? So basically, first of all, Chandri, right? So a Dalit woman, right? A lower caste woman, right? A lower caste woman went to Garud and Lakshman, right? And she was begging Garud and Lakshman to perform the last rites of the you could say Narnappa, but they were hesitant, right? So they were not, they were hesitant to offer their help, because the reason is that, first of all, as I have already told you, that they believe that if they perform the rites, that they equally, right, they will be excommunicated, right? They will be also discarded by the society, right? So, and moreover, any relationship with Chandri, if they say anything, any yes to Chandri, so that will definitely give people room for the discussion and criticism that they are also like Narnappa, right? So they denied, outrightly, they denied the request of the Chandri, right? So on the other hand, they were talked about that how, Narnappa, no, we will not be, performing the rites of the Narnappa, because Narnappa was already having a family. He left his wife, and they were actually putting blame on the Chandri, that you are the one, how she was responsible for, Narnappa's fall, right? So look at it. This is also the second theme, that how, we used to glorify, the man's flaws, and we do not find any fault in man, and and we justify man's fault on the name of the woman, right? So they were actually, accusing Chandari, that how, he was the responsible for the fall of the Narnappa, that how he left his wife, for a woman of a lower caste, and he was, eating meat, and he was drinking alcohol, and they were actually, criticizing the lifestyle of the Narnappa, that how Narnappa was actually living a lifestyle, who was totally in contrast with the Brahminical, Brahminical setup, right? So this was also the reason that, even they were, justifying that how Narnappa is, left with, left in between, right? So though he is dead, but he is not at all, able to have his last rite performed, because of his fall, right? So because of his fall, because of his, the ill practices, right? So he was having in the past, right? So on the other hand, it was left to Parneshacharya, right? So Parneshacharya will decide that, that he will decide that, who will, who will perform the rites, so it was Chandri, right? So Chandri went to Parneshacharya. He was looking at, full of hope, at the Parneshacharya, that it was, even he was requesting Parneshacharya that they should show some kind of a mercy, at the dead body. And even, Chandri went on, on offering her jewelry, right? So first of all, even she offered, the whole jewelry to Garud and Lakshman, that I will give you my jewelry, that but on the other hand, he was requesting them to perform the last rite. So you could see that it also portrays that how, women were in a totally, in a shattered condition, in that time, right? So, but then it was just on the, Parneshacharya. So Parneshacharya was totally in dilemma. He has no idea about, about the whole situation. So Parneshacharya actually, asked for the community, right? He asked for the people to, that he will have a, he will have a penance, he will have a meditation, right? He needs time, he demands time, that he really needs time, right? He will think about it, he'll go to a meditative state, right? He will have a meditation, and only then he will decide that will who will cremate the body, right? Who will perform the last rite. So it was all talking about the Parneshacharya, right? The dilemma of the Parneshacharya as well, right? So he was the most, the reverend person, the most educated person. So it was, so such kind of a situations will, crop up in any, in the life of any of the man, that where he has to, take the difficult decisions or very crucial decisions in his life, right? So it was left to Parneshacharya that he will decide. And he he asked for people that he needs time, right? So on the other hand, Pranishacharya, remembers that how then he Pranishacharya, he was remembering about Narnappa. He was, he still remembers that how Narnappa was the one, right? So Narnappa was saying that how these, that how all the Brahmin beliefs are the hypocrisies, right? So how people are actually, engaging in this caste, the all prevalent caste, and how, they are, not leading the joyful lives, right? So he was talking about, he was remembering Narnappa's word, that how he was saying that, how we are stuck in this, joyless lifestyle, and how, we are abstaining ourselves from all the joys of the world. And how just on the name of, caste, and how just on the name of, you could say, these rigid norms and rules, we are actually, we are actually, caging ourselves, we are caging ourselves, and we are not letting ourselves, out in the society, where we can actually, reel and enjoy our lives, right? So Praneshacharya was constantly in contemplation, he was actually, thinking about, the Nanappa, his life, his fall, right? So all about Nanappa's word, that how, what went wrong in Nanappa's life, right? That how, how a Brahmin was continuously, he was constantly attracted by all the sins, be it, fishing, be it alcohol, be it having a relationship with the, a Dalit woman, a lower caste woman, right? So this was the reason that he was actually fighting with the her own, demons as well, right? So basically it is actually, a story of Praneshacharya's transformation as well, right? So here we were talking about, right? So Praneshacharya. But on the other hand, when Garud and Lakshman, right? So they first of all, when Chandri was actually, requesting people, so it was all about, Garud and Lakshman as well. When Garud and Lakshman, they got to know that okay, Chandri was offering the jewelry, so they got enticed, right? So they got they got attracted to, they were greedy in the inside, right? So they really, want to perform the last rite. So look at it, look at the hypocrisy, the people who were actually, first of all, they were denying, they were hesitant to offer any kind of a help. But when they got to know from the village, right? So that Chandri was, he was requesting people, he was, he was begging people that, yet if somebody will perform the rites, last rites of the Nanappa, he will offer his jewelry, right? So somewhere down the line, so they were greedy, and now they were eager, and they were willing. But the problem is that it was the village, right? The village has decided that only Praneshacharya will pronounce the judgment, right? So now they are helpless, right? So it also, cast a lot of light on the, the hypocrisy, the double standards of the, the Brahmins, that how, they are also, greed driven, right? So they are, penny pinching, that how they are, fighting with each other over over the few pennies, over the, the jewelry of the Chandri. And how, they in the community, they pretend that they care for the, the Brahminical lifestyle. They really want to follow the pious lifestyle, they really want to, follow the legacy of the, the Brahmanism, right? But on the inside, so they were constantly, they were enticed by the greed. They really want to say yes to Chandri, that they will perform the last rite in order to, get the jewelry of the Chandri, right? So but on the other hand, in the last, right? So Chandri, nobody was, was there to pronounce the judgment, and Praneshacharya was not nowhere to be seen. So it was Chandri, right? So Chandri decided to follow the Praneshacharya, right? So Praneshacharya was actually, going to the, he was actually, meditating in the temple, and he was, meditating in the temple and contemplating about the, whole things about the Narnappa, and the everything, the controversy involved in Narnappa's samaskar. And he knows that it is very necessary decision, it is very crucial decision at the part of, at the part of uh, society, at the part of community, because only then people will eat, eat the first meal, eat their, have their meal together in the community. So it is a very important event, right? And his decision matters a lot, right? So it was very much important, right? For the Parneshacharya, to have the right decision. So, but on the other hand, Chandri was very desperate, right? So she was very desperate to perform the last rite. So Chandri was the one, right? So she followed Parneshacharya, right? So when Parneshacharya was, coming out of the temple, so there was, the complete change of the events, right? So it was Chandri, right? So, but on the other hand, Parneshacharya's body was so weak because they were not, they were not eating the meal since the death of the Narnappa, right? So he stumbled down somewhere, right? So it was Chandri, right? He got hold of Parneshacharya, right? And he asked Parneshacharya that are you fine, right? So the very contact, right? The first contact between, the physical contact between Chandri and the Parneshacharya, right? So according to the, the author, right? So it was because of, the weak body of the Parneshacharya, the deep contemplative mode, and moreover, the binaries, the collision between, the male and female, right? So ultimately, it leads to way to the physical intimacy of the Parneshacharya, right? So Parneshacharya was the one, right, who felt weak at knees, right, at the contact of the Chandri, right, and they both hug each other, and then they have the, they have the first intercourse, and they have their intercourse in the forest, right? So it also sheds light on the character of the Parneshacharya, right? The so-called, the priest, the so-called priest who is revered, who is respected. On the other hand, right, he is the one, right, who comes to the lust, to the physical desire, right, to the physical hunger. You could say the physical hunger. It can be the food or it can be the lust, right? But on the other hand, you could have a complete contrast between Chandri and Bhagirthi, right? He deliberately married Bhagirthi in order to have salvation, but on the other hand, he's too weak inside because he was just repressing his desires, right? He was just repressing his desires to become a priest, to enjoy the status. But on the other hand, the few basic needs are, few basic needs, are very natural to the humans, right? So they have a discourse. On the other hand, when, they slept together in the forest, and when he got up, right, so he saw that Chandri was there. So Chandri was still, pleading, the, you could say, Parneshacharya, that he will not say anything to anyone, right? He was just there, to request about Nappa's last rites. And it was, Parneshacharya, he was weak and he was fragile, so she kind of, offered her help, right? So look at it. So, a lower caste woman, so she was thinking that, so she was just contributing her bit, right? So she was not manipulating the man, she was not, enticing the man, or not even, using the man. So she was not a kind of a woman, right, who was actually, changing the man, right, to be it Narnappa, then she'll shift it to Parneshacharya. So she was simply, she say that she will conceal every information, she will not disclose anything, because it was, it was all about the comfort you needed. And right, so we have that thing, for your comfort, and because of the physical hunger, the natural thing, right? So this was the reason that, he sleeps with her that night, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and tells Chandri that no, he must confess it to everybody, right? So because it was the first sin, right? First sin that dawned upon the Parneshacharya, right? On the mind and the body of the Parneshacharya. And he on the other hand, now he became aware that how much he sinned, right? So at that level, if we talk about, right, so the ultimate, the most revered man, the highly respected man, Parneshacharya, he also, transgresses to the status of the Narnappa. So now there was no difference between Narnappa and the Parneshacharya. They both are on the same ground, right? So people used to, accuse Narnappa because he's actually having a, illicit relationship with, a lower caste woman. So same goes with Parneshacharya. Even Parneshacharya slept with the women, right? But on the other hand, Chandri feels guilty, right? So what has occurred? She thinks that everything that, it turns out very poorly. She was in the great sadness. And on the other hand, if we think, point of view from the Chandri as well, so she was under, a lot of, mental turmoil. She was under a lot of depression. Even she wants to, have the comfort. She wants comfort. She wants that, the coalescing, the physical solace. She was also in the need of the physical solace that she found ultimately in the, in the arms of the Praneshacharya, right? So in the desperation, right? So it was all about, Chandris as well, right? So on the other hand, Chandri was actually, restraining Praneshacharya, that he should not, tell anything to anyone. But on the other hand, he simply, pronounced the judgment, and he will just give the duty to someone to have the last rite done by the someone of the Parnapa, and they will be over with the sad situation what Narnapa was actually in. So she was more much and more, sympathized for the Narnapa, right? So because, even when we read from the religion, and even if we read from the popular imagination as well, right? So people will say that, so samaskar is very important, sanskar of the body, right? So the last rites of the body is very much needed, right? So because only then when the body will be cremated, people say that, then it will travel the, it will travel the lands, and ultimately it got reunited with the god. Ultimately in the end, after the cremation of the body, and after will be the last rites of the body is going to, attain the abode of the god. So the Chandri was in definitely in a desperation that she really wants, the good for the Nanapa at the end of the time, right? But on the other hand, Praneshacharya was himself, aware of the sins that he has committed, just in the fit of a moment, right? So in just a, in a night, the whole world has changed. So he was just running around, he ran from the village, and he went to the, he village, and he was totally disappeared from the village. People were asking that he must be in the meditative mood, right? So he was actually, seeking the answer for the question that who will be, cremating the body of the Narnapa, right? So people were actually, eagerly looking for the Praneshacharya. But meanwhile, then Chandri got aware that what has happened, and further, any delay will be harming Parneshacharya and Narnapa equally, right? If such things will keep on delaying this way. So in the end, when we were talking about the last rites, when we were talking about the Samaskar, so Samaskar are that the Narnapa's dead body, right? So Narnapa's dead body was actually, cremated by the, Narnapa has a few Muslim friends as well, right? So one of the, the people used to say the causes of the downfall, must be aware of that, how Hindus and Muslims have, inherent animosity, and on the name of, religious differences. So Napa is also, having a close connections with few, Muslim friend as well, right? So he has a Muslim friend. So Chandri knows that if anybody, nobody will be from the Brahmin community will be, agreeing to, perform the last, right? So by trick, right? So in the end, in the next morning, when she got up, right? So in the desperation, she went to the Muslim man, and both of them, right? So Chandri and the Muslim man, they cremated the body, right? So by way of uh, the by way of some kind of a manipulation, right? So they took the body, and they cremated the body of the Narnapa. So ultimately, the last rites of Samasara, right? The last rite of Narnapa was performed by Chandri and the Muslim friend, right? So those who were actually close to Narnapa, those who were actually, you could say, those who were actually, the real entitled, right? Really entitled to perform the last rites, right? Because Chandri was definitely, close to Narnapa, and she loves Narnapa and the Muslim friend, because, the glorified idea of, friendship, that how, friend is need in a friend indeed, right? So he was definitely, performed to be the ultimate emerges to be a true friend, right? So they emerged, they cremated the body. But on the other hand, when we look at the character of Praneshacharya, so Praneshacharya was now, crossing the villages, and he was constantly in the dilemma that, right, that how he will face the villagers, right? Because he has ultimately committed the sin. He was restraining himself from this from this act, since, since a lot of years, right? This was the reason that he married Bhagirthi, right? But on the other hand, within a fit of a moment, within a whole night, the whole dynamics has changed, and now he is running from one village to another. He went outside the Durvasapura, and he was actually, trying to run away from his own self. So basically, it was all about, the discovery of the you could say Parneshacharya as well, right? So by the end of the novel, it was there that how he meets a, he meets a man, right, a young man, right, and he recognized that he is the acharya, he is the priest. So that man is also a, you could say, a Dalit man, and he offered that, he offered Paneshacharya with, a lot of things. He, it would be a kind of a treat, for a Dalit, right, to have an acharya at home, to have an acharya at the first sight, right. But on the inside, you could see that how, the it was all about that how appearances are deceptive, right, and how, the double standards, the hypocrisy, the casteist mindset we have, right. So somebody who is actually, looking pious is not at all pious from inside, right. But on the other hand, these people, these Dalits, for example, we have the, the Chandri, right. The Chandri is much more kind than the so-called Brahmin community, right? Those who are actually running away from, performing the last rites of a dead man, right? So they are even, hesitant to perform the last rites of the dead man. But on the other hand, Chandri was so courageous, Chandri was so kind, Chandri was so in love with, Napa, that in the end, that she was the one who emerged, as the powerful figure to, to get everything done, and she was ultimate, the male, ultimate man in the relationship, right. So in the end, that Parneshacharya, he was running away, and he was actually, meditative mode, or the novels, and, very open note, right. When the Parneshacharya, though he was running away from the, society, running away from the community, he doesn't want to return to Durvasapura for the, in the initial, initial starting of the day, when he will, he thought that if what if Chandri, narrated the whole thing, what if, people will get to know about it, and how will he himself will face the people, right. He was able to attain the salvation, and he slept with the lower caste woman, right. He could not get hold of the, the, you could say, the carnal desires, the physical desires, and how will he will, he will face the people, and the people who are actually respecting him as the highest, the highest man in the community. Then how he, how he will able to, pronounce the judgment, how he is able to assert the authority, as if he said that he has committed a sin, that he has lost the authority of the people. But on the other hand, gradually, right, gradually, the character of the Praneshacharya, right, he he transforms, right. He embraces a change, because whenever he thinks about the Chandri, right, he was not even thinking about Chandri, in any kind of with any kind of a contempt, right. He still remembers the warm touches of the, the body of the Chandri, that how, the solace, the warmth that Chandri's body was emanating, right. The kind of warmth he was in the dire need, right. The kind of a warmth, the kind of solace that he hasn't found, in the relationship when he had in the Bhagirthi, right. So he was constantly, aware whenever he think about the encounter, right, the encounter, the intimacy he shares with the Chandri, right. So he fills with the warmth. He wants to, recast, he wants to reimagine it again and again, the kind of, physical encounter he has with the Chandri. So it is going to be a dilemma between a spiritual and the, the physical world, right. So the spiritual world, he trying to imbibe, in front of his community, in front of his own world, in front of his own family, right. And on the other hand, the kind of a physical world, right. So the and a physical world he has, the physical encounter he has with the Chandri side. So it is going to be a dilemma between the spiritual and the physical. And the novels, ends on the open point, right. Ends on the, open note, when in the end, right, he decides that in the end, that he decides that he will, he will come back to Durvasapura, and in the end he will, he'll tell people, right. So what has happened between him and Chandri, right. So the novel ends on this open note, when he took the, the bullock cart, and he wants to return to the village, right. So though he was running around from the village, right, so he was actually, fearing the, you could say, the wrath of the people, that people will, discard him, people will excommunicate him, he will be disrespected, he will be, lowered, he will be, he will be treated the same way. There is no difference between him and Napa. But in the end, he embraces the change, and he ultimately got a self discovery, right? He discovers herself, that how he feels that the real identity, right, what he is really within himself is much more important, rather than showcasing people as a pious man, right? So he feels that the admission, right, the admission of his own identity, what his choices are, right, the admission of the, the carnal physical desires, it is very much natural, and it is very much, prominent part of your, identity and personality. It is very common. And on the other hand, the sham of the, the strict rules, the strict community, the, the casteist society, the double standards of the people, right? So it is nothing when it comes to the, the natural, the natural desires, the natural desires of between a man and a woman. So in the end, on the novels ends on the open note, that when he decides to return back to his village, and he decides to, tell everybody, tell his community, that what has actually happened between him and Chandri, right? I hope this much is clear, Sushmita.
Yes, ma'am.
So before even, concluding the lecture, before even, concluding few of the themes, I would like to, really know about your point of view. How do you perceive, Pranesha Charya Chandri, and what do you think that, what are the prominent theme of the novel apart from the cast?
Ma'am, when you were telling about the story, I remember one of the stories called Scarlet Letter
Okay, very good.
by by
By
Nathaniel
Napoleon
Hawthorne.
Hill. Okay, very good.
Yes, it's kind of the same in that the female protagonist wants to, penance, and she did that, and only after that she get that kind of peace in herself. That is the same line I have seen in this story, where Pranisha Charya is, suffering from the thought that he has done a sin, and he wants to penace. And I think Chandri is a very strong woman. She's a very good example of feminism. Because she's, she wants to cremate the body of Narnappa, and that too with the accepted methods of the last rites. I believe Chandri is a very strong woman.
Okay, so
Narnappa, yes, ma'am.
what do you think about, the kind of, transformation, Pranesha Charya has, right? So it is all about, what I mean to, make you understand about, the caste system, that how, what do you think that we should bestow some people, with the titles like Acharya, the kind of, prestige that Pranesha Acharya was actually, was, which are actually enjoying, the kind of, the man worship, what we we talk about, right? The man worship, the Brahmin worship, right? The ultimate, the hypocrisy of the, you could say, the Samaskara. How do you perceive the title when we talk about the Samaskara? So what do you think, right? How the title is connected to the three of them?
uh, ma'am, I don't know actually.
Okay, so
How to explain.
basically, okay, no problem, Shushmita. So when we were talking about the title, right? So basically, as in, it was talking about on a very superficial level. It was talking about the samaskara, the last rites of the dead person, right? So
Yes.
it was talking about, the last rite of the Narnapa on a very superficial level when we talk about, right? So sanskar, samaskar. But on the other hand, if we, if we delve deeper and deeper when we talk about why the whole, the ritual of last rites, right? So the last rite of samaskara was performed because, as T.S. Eliot also said, that every end has a beginning, right? So same goes here, right? So they will be, and the last rites of a dead person is performed for his new beginning, right? That he is soon going to have a new beginning in the new world, right? So it is going to be a new birth, or it is going to be the ultimate union with the God, right? The spirit will, there will be, if they will embrace the God, the spirit will have, reside in the abode of the God. So it will going to be have a reincarnation, right? On the other hand, this samaskara is also, has the, the connotations of the polishing or the redefinition, right? Redefining the body, right? The dead body, or the spirit will redefine itself, right? It is going to have a new birth, right? So it is going to have a new, a new discovery in the other world, right? So but if we study from the point of view of Parneshacharya and Nirnappa, right? So though first of all, let's comprehend Narnappa. Though Narnappa was dead, right? But on the other
Yes.
hand, and Narnappa was already dead in the eyes of the community. If we talk about it, even when he was physically alive, he was totally dead in front of his own people, because people believe that he is not at all a Brahmin according to the actions, right? He is not at all doing the appropriate action. So people will, though they have not excommunicated. I hope you understand the term excommunicated, when they completely, debar
Yes, ma'am.
the person from the community. So though he was not excommunicated, but people somehow discarded him. People were not in the talking terms, and they were not in contact. And we have already know that he is actually, friendship with the Dalits, lower caste women, and with the Muslims, right? So he was close connection with that. So though Narnappa was considered death earlier with the people, right, in the eyes of the people, that before even his death. But on the other hand, Narnappa already has this rediscovery before the death, right? Narnappa surpassed the hierarchies of caste, class, and gender as well, right? So Narnappa's actions, right? So how Narnappa was involved with the relationship with, you could say, Chandri, and Narnappa was actually, Narnappa was actually having a friendship with a Muslim man. So he is kind of a come out of all the restrictive, restrictive, and restrictive, and very much rigorous rules and norms of the Brahmin, Brahmin setup, right? The caste system of the India, right? So it is a kind of already a rebirth of the Narnappa on the earth as well, right? When he already, is able to perceive that how, how the Brahmin customs and traditions is full of hypocrisy. I hope you are able to get my point,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So it so so,
Yes, ma'am.
so it was, it was not the samaskar of, you could say, Narnappa, in the symbolic sense or in the metaphorical sense. the it,
Yes.
it was it was the samaskar of Praneshacharya, right? So
Yes, ma'am.
Praneshacharya that was reborn again. It was Praneshacharya that was redefined, right? The Praneshacharya got redefinition of himself, right? It was the Praneshacharya who actually has an end, right? The end of the hypocrisy, that the hypocrisy and the restrictive society he was living in. And Praneshacharya, it was the starting or the new beginning of the life of a Praneshacharya, that he imagines himself when he decides that he will, he will come to the village, he will come to the community, and he will pronounce, he will tell everything, right, what has happened between him and Chandri, right? So it was all about that, because, right, as I have already told you, that Napa was, already, he come out of the, caste structure. He was, able to come out of the hypocrisy and the restrictive rules, because he was already, he was shunning, the all the barriers, right? He was totally, he was destroying the barriers of the caste, class, and gender, right? Because on the other hand, Praneshacharya, if we see that people were, actually calling, actually putting, or actually, casting, Narnappa in the bad light. But it was, if we see from inside, it was Praneshacharya who has more sinned rather than Narnappa, right? So Narnappa, though from the, from the outside he looks that he is impure, but on the other hand he is very pure at heart. He is not at all discriminating with people on the name of caste, class, and gender, right? He is mingling with the lower caste women, right, giving him the authority to be equal, giving him the authority to be a partner. He's actually, he's actually, having a friendship with the Muslim man, right? So he, from inside he is pure. But on the other hand, if we see the motivations of the Praneshacharya, right, the first motivation of the Praneshacharya to become the priest, right, and deliberately he married Bhagirthi. So that was even very selfish act, right? He wants to achieve salvation at the cost of Bhagirthi, right? Though he pretends that he is doing everything, right, selflessly, unconditionally, right, and he is the celebrated hero in the community, that how he married a half woman, somebody who is, bedridden, and she's suffering from a deadly disease. And but on the other hand, his decision of the celibate, his decision of being the celibate is very selfish one, right? Because he wants to attain salvation, he wants to, earn more and more points, to get the salvation on the name of Bhagirthi, right? So that was definitely a selfish act, right? So as it was said that the bhav matters, right? So your emotions matter, your motive matter, rather than, your action doesn't matter, right? If you commit any kind of a action with full of your devotion, with full of your pure emotions, even the bad thing will turn out good in the end, right? But on the other hand, Parneshacharya, he was doing something good, but with the bad intention. Right? He was somewhere selfish at a point of a time where he wants to attain salvation at the name of Bhagirthi. Right? So he was not doing service to Bhagirthi, but he was doing service to himself. This was the reason that in a very one-fifth of the moment, right, the first contact with the Chandri forced him to have a physical contact with the Chandri, right? So it was not
Yes.
at all Chandri who will be at the fault, right? Because
Yes.
Chandri was already aware of the sexuality. It was Parneshacharya, right? Parneshacharya was not at all aware of the his sexuality, and it was the first contact with the Chandri, right? He could not control the desires, and he could not control the desires which he was repressing for so long. He was pretending to be the celibate, right, just in order to be the ultimate, the ultimate hero of the community, just in order to be the ultimate priest of the community, just to enjoy, the Praneshacharya, the Acharya, just to be the, the attain salvation, right? So this was the reason, the very act, the physical intimacy between, Praneshacharya and Chandri, it was actually the very natural act of Praneshacharya and Chandri, and rather than what he was doing with Bhagirthi, that was something very unnatural, right? That was something
Yes.
very selfish, and that was something very unnatural that he has with Bhagirthi, right? But on the other hand, with Chandri, it was very much natural. It was all about the physical desires which are very much natural, the physical hunger, right? The You are Ananthamurti even mentioned that how his body was very much weak, and because of the hunger as well, right? Because they were not eating, because of the Narnapa's last rites were still due. So the hunger, the whole hunger, it can be, the hunger, the physical hunger, it can be the any hunger of any of the sense, right? So it can be a lust, or it can be a hunger, right? The mingling of the hunger and lust, right? So this was the reason that act was not at all, the act of selfish, but rather than it was a very natural act where two individuals wholeheartedly participate, right, to give and to take something out of it, right? I hope that makes sense. And
Yes,
rather
ma'am.
than, the last rites of the Praneshacharya, Narnappa, it was actually the journey of the Praneshacharya, right? So it was Praneshacharya who was dead from inside, and he was reborn by the physical intimacy, or you could say by the encounter, the one encounter he has with Chandri, and the kind of, the dilemma. He was the meditative, the meditative status he has, the state he was actually reeling in during the thought process, he was having at the death of the Nirnappa, right? So it was actually the, you could say, the rebirth of the Nirnappa, where, sorry, rebirth of the Parneshacharya, where he feels that how, that how our morality, and how, how our morality is so much, on the basis of the outside society, right? We try to pose our morals, in front of the society only, right? But on the other hand, if we are, away from the society, so we are simply the physical beings, right, who are in the need of few desires, right? So it is very natural, right? Rather than, and on the other hand, he got to know that how his own society, right, the Brahminical setup, right, it is so full of hypocrisy, right? He himself feel in the end that how he wants to be a priest, but on the other hand, in the end, he simply wants the solace. He simply wants, the warmth of the Chandri again. He really wants to, have an encounter. He wants to see and feel Chandri again, right? He really wants to feel her warmth again, right? So in the end, he wants to, he kind of this realization that how it was all about, he with the kind of restricted society they are reeling in, right? The society, they were actually, putting a lot of restrictions over themselves, right? And they are actually, leading them away from the from the, the contact between man to man, right? So the how the society was, totally, and even in the case of Narnappa as well, right? So the people will not have a sympathy over the dead body of a poor man, right? Even after, even the person is gone, they are actually, regretting, and they are actually accusing that person of, accusing the person of his past, that in the past he was doing this, in the past he was doing this. The person is gone, right? Still they are judging him. But on the other hand, even though he is gone, the caste was very much intact there, right? Nobody was entitled, for the cremation, except the Brahmins, right? So that there are a lot of, intermingling of the morality, the caste, right? And the brahminical setup, right? The regressive, and the repressive, the moralities, the repressive rules and norms they have, right? So you are an Ananthamurti, being a Brahmin himself, he showed the hypocrisy of the Brahmin society, right? That how, we have the examples of Garud and Lakshman. They were very much hesitant at the first sight, but on the other hand, when they got to know that, they were going to have the, the jewelry of the Chandri, they were ready, right? So it was not from the inside, right? So it was not from the inside they were hesitant, right? So it was just depends upon the convenience, right? So they were greedy from the inside, but on the other hand, they just pretends to be the Brahmin. So it was all about that, how the whole concept of varna vivastha was not there, right? So it was just the, you could say, in my words, the Chandri was much more pure, right? So Chandri was much more pure, Chandri was much more kind, that she was actually offering more than what she has, right? She has offering more than what she has. Same goes with in the case of Narnappa. She was offering her jewelry. She was, she was, showing all the love for the, even at the, last rites of the Narnappa. And same goes with the Parneshacharya as well. It was Parneshacharya who was in the state of hunger, but Chandri was actually, giving more than what he has, right? I hope that makes sense now, Shushmita.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So please read the text, and I would love to have your interpretation or any other query or question you will be having in the next session. So tomorrow
Yes.
we will be discussing Tamas and few of the short stories, right? I hope this much is clear. So
Yes,
tomorrow we'll
ma'am.
be meeting at the same time at 6, so at the same time, right? And we will be discussing Tamas. You have already started reading Tamas, so we will be
Yes,
discussing
ma'am.
Tamas and few of the short stories, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank
जी सर, हो गया है आज के लिए. That is all for today.
Okay, thank